Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy.
Hey, Greg.
And Tia Mitchell.
Hey.
Hey, guys. Well, while Republicans head into another month of runoffs, Democrats are trying to send a very different message, and that is that they're united, they're organized, and they're already running against Donald Trump. That's why Jon Ossoff and Keisha Lance Bottoms are moving quickly to present themselves almost as a unity ticket. Ossoff is fighting for re-election for the U.S. Senate. Bottoms, of course, is the Democratic nominee for governor. But together, they're betting that early unity can become a contrast to the Republican infighting going on in the Senate runoffs and the gubernatorial runoffs. The question is whether that alliance gives Democrats a real head start, or whether Republicans can turn it into a 2-for-1 attack on the Democratic brand come November. Patricia, you wrote a big column about this a few days ago. You have thoughts.
Well, I do have some thoughts. First of all, I think for Jon Ossoff, he has no choice in the matter. He needs to get behind Keisha Lance Bottoms. She was the runaway favorite of Democratic voters. Also, we all know in Georgia, the base of Democratic voters, the most reliable voters and the most successful candidates are Black women. Ossoff needs to embrace the other half of the top of this ticket in Keisha Lance Bottoms. Of course, there are some potential downsides for Senator Ossoff. Mayor Bottoms' tenure as Atlanta mayor was unbelievably tumultuous. There is a lot that Republicans have already started going after her on, and they will tie Ossoff to that record, which he was not tied to before. But be that as it may, there is no option, and there is a big upside for him to get out that Black vote. When he ran in 2020 and 2021 in that runoff, Black voters and being aligned with Senator Warnock was essential to his election victory. So this is a chance for him to repeat that formula. Of course, if things change, if she has a change in fortunes, they're not getting married. You know, this is a now situation. I wouldn't expect him to abandon her if something goes south, but he certainly is doing what he needs to do right now. And I think for Bottoms, there are a lot of upsides as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there are more upsides for Bottoms than Ossoff, but I think that Ossoff doesn't have a choice because he cannot be perceived as leaving her out to dry. You know, he has more fundraising ability than her. We know he has, you know, the kind of money, and she struggled to raise money. She did better than her opponents in the primary, but she struggled to raise money, and she's going to need it to go up against whether it's Bert Jones or Rick Jackson. So I think Ossoff can help her in that way. Again, Ossoff not being tied to some of the controversies of Bottoms' mayoral tenure is something that perhaps them running together can help insulate her from some of those things if he defends her from some of those things. We know Ossoff is pretty good with the sound bites, so I think there are a lot of upsides for Bottoms. But to your point, one thing that Ossoff does not have is he's not a Black woman. And we saw that Black women were not just that they're the base of the Democratic Party, but that for many reasons, they look to support other Black women who are on the ticket. And that goes deep. That's shades of their disappointment in the way they perceive that Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris were treated by voters and by party leaders. And so I think it does help that, again, that Ossoff is perceived as not just being on the ticket with Bottoms, but that is truly being a partner to her.
Yeah, I mean, guys, we've seen this movie before because, of course, in 2020 and 2021, Ossoff ran with Senator Warnock, then Reverend Raphael Warnock, as a tandem ticket. And I think, if I remember correctly, of all the runoff ads he had during that 9-week period back then, I think every single one of them, or almost every single one of them, is geared towards Black voters, of course, being the base of the party. So Ossoff benefited from, running as a tandem with who he called the brother from another mother. They would always call themselves that on the campaign trail. And so this gives him, he's used to running as a ticket. But on the other hand, I mean, Patricia, you said he doesn't really have a choice, but especially when you look across the aisle, Governor Kemp did not run with, Herschel Walker. Stacey Abrams And Raphael Warnock did not run as a tandem ticket by any means in 2022. And I go way back to like 2014 when David Perdue and Nathan Deal were running their own bus tours around the state. Sometimes they would like kind of get near each other, but they definitely ran very distinct campaigns, as did Jason Carter back then and Michelle Nunn. So, this tandem ticket idea is somewhat newer in Georgia politics.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to see, the double bus tour. We have to just see how this plays out. But I think in the immediate moment when she was declared the winner, I was fascinated that Ossoff came out immediately and said she ran a great campaign. She'll be a fabulous nominee for us. And then when I spoke with their campaigns the next day, they used the word partners. And so I think Republicans have been wondering how closely would Ossoff align himself to this strategy. I've been really fascinated by his choices throughout this campaign. At the beginning of 2025, he came out just ripping Donald Trump in his first rally here in Atlanta when Ossoff came and really kicked off his own campaign. And that was we weren't sure, like, is this going to be good politics for him? It just seems to be exactly how he feels. And as time has gone on, I think voters have caught up with him on that. And he does not doubt his instincts on these choices. I think also it plays to a huge contrast with Republicans who are just being roiled by this friction between Derek Dooley and Mike Collins. It is so personal between these two. It is so ugly. President Trump, as of this taping, as you said, we don't know if he's going to get involved, but it's just so much churn on the Republican side. Democrats can just sit back and row in the same direction right now.
I hate to bring up old stuff, but I do want to bring up the one perceived misstep or the one place where Ossoff maybe had some pushback that threatened his campaign a little bit. And that's when he pushed Nikema Williams out as chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia, or at least contributed to her stepping down as chair as the Democratic Party of Georgia. And when it happened, there were the critics who said, he was coming down hard on a Black woman in leadership. Again, it became potentially something that could harm Ossoff because there were people saying he's not supporting Black women. Black women are the base of the party, but he's going to expect Black women to show up for him when it's time for the election. Now, say for people on podcasts who keep bringing it up, I don't think people are still thinking about it, but I thought about it in the context, again, of him deciding to show up for Keisha Lance Bottoms. Again, I do think in general his instincts seem to turn out pretty good for him. When you talk to people close to his campaign, he was never afraid of Bottoms leading the ticket the way other Democrats and strategists were. He never had concern about Keisha Lance Bottoms becoming the nominee. And I think that is part of the reason why he was so quick to come out and congratulate her, I think the same night as the election, if not definitely by the next morning. And again, I think that's why he feels it's important to show that unity.
Yeah, and definitely different races, different contexts, but he was very vocal. He did not hide his role in ousting Nikema Williams as party chair, saying basically nothing against her, but you can't do both jobs at once. We need someone who's full-time as Democratic Party of Georgia chair, and ended up backing Charlie Bailey, who just engineered this giant turnout effort for the party, $8 million turnout effort for the Democratic Party, and did not play a role whatsoever in the primaries, stuck to his race, really kind of kept his head down, head focused on Trump stuff, and on his own race. But it's interesting because there are these two giant gambles. One looks like it's borne out so far based on the polls, right? The first big gamble was being very aggressive against Trump, as you mentioned, Patricia. Polls show Democrats want more confrontational, more aggressive approach to Donald Trump, just like here in Georgia, just like around the nation. Second, we don't know yet. Let me read you some of the quotes about, the partnership with Ossoff from Republicans. The RNC said Ossoff was partnering with a left-wing lunatic. Georgia GOP chair Josh McCoon, he posted an image of a burning car during the violent protests in Atlanta back in 2020, 2021 during Bottoms' tenure. He told me now the senator gets to fully own her disastrous tenure as mayor of Atlanta, mismanaging the city, going after police officers, and letting the 2020 riots and their aftermath claim Sequoia Tina Turner's life. And Derek Dooley, Mike Collins, they both had very predictable, very cutting quotes. Collins said that he can't wait to make a contrast between the record of safety, security, and law and order from the Republicans and the radical chaos, destruction, and despair of that duo. Dooley's spokesman said the campaign won't, quote, tire of reminding voters just how reckless and dangerous these two liberal peas in a pod are. So, Patricia, we already see these attacks. We already see what's coming on the airwaves, if not this week, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, listen, Republicans are delighted with this turn of events. They have had a really hard time painting Jon Ossoff as the radical liberal that they love to try and do to statewide Democrats, and they've just not been able to really slow down or even damage Ossoff's reputation at this point. I think they see an opening here with him embracing Keisha Lance Bottoms so fully. In turn, his response, not response to that, but the way he's been running his race is to tie Derek Dooley and Mike Collins to Donald Trump and say, if you want law and order, don't create a slush fund for January 6th people who attacked police officers. If you want somebody who's not radical, don't spend all of your time being distracted by a ballroom while you're invading Iran. So he's going to tie those two gentlemen to who he sees to be the most vulnerable Republican in the country, and that's the president, who they're both really working overtime to get his approval.
I also think, and we'll see how well or not well former Mayor Bottoms explains this, but the truth is it's much more nuanced when you talk about her record. For example, yes, Sequoia Turner, the death of Rayshard Brooks, the protests in the summer of 2020 were really a black mark on her record, but in ways that infuriated progressives as well. For example, she's the one who put the Public Safety Training Center in motion, better known as Cop City. We know that there are progressives who were really upset with her for that. And that's a way she could say, hey, you think I'm not for law and order? I made my base mad for pushing forward with Cop City. And even during the protests of 2020, I remember her having press conferences with Killer Mike and T.I., basically to tell the protesters to go home, to get out of the streets. She said, she worried that it was becoming safe and it was chaos, and this was not about, Black Lives Matter. This was becoming about something else. And, she can play those clips just like Republicans are playing the clips of the city burning. Again, it'll be interesting to see how she defends herself, but I think there is room for her to talk about what she did in ways that disrupt the narrative that she was the one, encouraging the protests, because the reality was she was not. She was quite discouraging, if you will.
Yeah, and we got to take a quick break, but Tia's point exactly. I mean, Patricia, we thought this runoff would be a chance for Democrats to sort of sharpen that contrast, because it really didn't come up in a major way during the primary. Jason Estevez here and there hit the mayor on her record, but most of those candidates, the other 3 or 4 major candidates in the Democratic race, stayed in their own lanes. They focused on their own records, their own agenda, their own plans. There's very little attacking of the mayor's record because they thought there would be a runoff to really sharpen that. The mayor certainly had to do her own share of defending, but it wasn't this all-out defensive posture because there is no runoff.
Yeah, and I think in retrospect, was a huge strategic blunder on the part of Democrats not to go after her record, because although she does have things she can point to, including greenlighting Cop City, I mean, those were dark days in the city of Atlanta. And when Andre Dickens ran his first ad for re-election, he said Atlanta was having dark days. Those were the days that Mayor Bottoms was the mayor. And that really caught our attention, that Dickens was even willing to run an ad like that, knowing that she had ambitions in the future. But there will be a lot of people who I think will have a lot to say about the mayor's tenure that she'll need to answer for.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the Republican side of the race, the governor's race and the Senate race. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with a packed house, Patricia Murphy and Tia Mitchell. A reminder, if you've got a question you'd like to ask us here in Politically Georgia, you can call the hotline anytime, day or night, leave a question, and we're going to play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. You can also email us at politicallygeorgia, all one word, at ajc.com or patricia.murphy@ajc.com. We can't wait to hear from you. Send her all your emails. So let's talk about the governor's race. Lieutenant Governor Bert Jones told me he is trying to flip billionaire Rick Jackson's greatest strength into a liability. That's because Jackson's wealth helped him crash the race and blanket the airwaves with $80 million plus in ads. Jones is now arguing the spending proves recklessness, not strength. The message from him is if Jackson spends his own money this way, what would he do with yours? Patricia, I know we were with him the day before the primary where he was asked basically, what's the limit? Where do you stop spending? Is $200 million limit? Because he's already blown past about $100 million ish. Ish is very, ish means millions of dollars, but around there. And he goes, listen, I don't play footsie, essentially. He's like, I'm all in.
He also is like, I don't care what it takes. Yeah. I mean, this is a man who has so much money. He does not care how much he spends on this race. And he said, listen, I am spending money. I'm going to continue because I wasn't doing this as a hobby or a curiosity. I got in this to win it, and I think I will. And I will spend the resources I need to. That means I don't have to ask donors for favors. I don't have to pay them back for the money they gave me. I don't have to ask my dad for money. I'm doing this on my own. I've been a little surprised that the Jackson campaign, as of now, doesn't feel like they've really pushed back on Bert Jones saying that. And I never imagined a day where Bert Jones would look like the little guy who didn't have the money to
with $16 million of his own family's fortune.
Of his own family, of the oil family. This is just such a bizarre race. And I do feel like Jackson has gotten knocked back on his heels on this issue when he explains it very well in person. And you can tell if there's a way you can say it's coming from the heart when someone says, I'm going to spend anything I have to. But they're now able to paint Rick Jackson as kind of a reckless rich guy. And you and I both, there was this moment, then I want to hear from Tia, there was this moment at that rally at the end where we were trying to figure out, is he going to leave in his private helicopter or his private jet? And they were literally parked right next to each other on the tarmac. And his campaign staff took the jet and he took the helicopter. But I mean, this guy's got cash.
And do you remember, like with Kelly Loeffler, we had to figure, and she was the other sort of mega wealthy person running, but the amount she spent on her own race is nothing compared to the amount Rick Jackson spent. But you remember we had to kind of investigate and dive into and try to figure out if she bought herself a plane, and she did. It was $30 or so $1 million ish, if I remember. And Rick Jackson's
they're very sensitive. The Loeffler campaign was so sensitive. Yep. And he reminds me kind of a Donald Trump. He lands the helicopter at events and people think it's super cool.
Yeah, he's leaning right into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was, when you guys were talking about like branding him as a reckless spender. He's not going broke, even if he spends $200 million. And I think that's what people know about Rick Jackson. Like, it'd be different. It's like, oh my God, he has wasted away his life savings. But I don't think that's what's happening here. So I don't know if it's going to convince people that, like, even if he spends all this money and doesn't win, Rick Jackson's plane and his helicopter are going to still be taking off and landing. And that's what makes him very different than the rest of us. So I just don't know if that type of attack will stick.
Yeah, he's very Trump-like in that messaging. He's just literally echoing Trump. He says, if I lose, I've got this great life. I've already have this, that. I've done all this amazing stuff. I don't need this. But the way he actually messages on the campaign trail is interesting because he says, essentially, he drew a line in the air a long time ago. And this was what he needed for his family and his legacy and all this, and then everything above it was God's money. And, cynical political analysts can be like, that sounds just like cheesy. But when he says that on the campaign trail and you watch the crowd and you watch people not only sort of nod, but also really get teary-eyed sometimes when he says it. And he views this, he's given lots to different charities and philanthropies over the years and foster care initiatives and refugees and you name it. But Patricia, he clearly, throughout the campaign and including in that interview with us right before the primary, that he views spending on his campaign as part of that God's money, because he feels like if he can win, he'll bring about a lot more change in ways he wants to see change made in Georgia government than he could by spending from the outside.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he says. Imagine how much I could help 11 million Georgians if I could become the leader, if I could become the governor. And he says many times, I want to be the voice for the voiceless. I want to take up for kids in foster care, kids who don't have enough to eat, families who aren't getting by. I want to be there for them. That's the message in the room. It feels like there's a very different message coming out on the airwaves. There's so many ads, it's actually hard to keep track of all the ads, but a lot of them are so negative against Bert Jones and trying to take him down a notch for being inside pay to play, that I don't feel like that message of I want to be the voice for the voiceless has really broken through in the way sort of like a George W. Bush compassionate conservative message has broken through. That was so effective for Bush. I feel like it could be very effective for Jackson if he gets through this runoff. But that message is being a little bit drowned out by this food fight, this very expensive food fight that's going on between him and Bert Jones.
The most expensive food fight in at least the state, but maybe the nation right now. Tia, let's switch gears because I want to ask you about someone you've been covering for years. It's the Brandon Phillips controversy. It became an instant headache for Senate. I don't know if we can call him the front runner, but he certainly was the number one finisher, the top finisher in the Republican primary, Mike Collins. Just as Republicans were trying to pivot from the primary to the runoff, Phillips is a top Collins aide who's a longtime conservative operative, known for provocative, I guess is the nice way to say it, but a very hard-edged, elbows out approach to Republican politics, been at the center of more than a few controversies over the years. He's triggered backlash after the Collins campaign account, which he's involved in, posted a vulgar insult targeting a Dooley ally whose wife had previously attempted suicide after accusing former NBC host Matt Lauer of rape. Tia, this set off shockwaves, not just in the Georgia Republican ecosystem, but really around the nation, as we heard a lot of Republicans nationally condemn Mike Collins' campaign for this tweet. And then Mike Collins stepped in not so long after the tweet, like it was basically 3 or 4 hours, and said he's dismissed the staffer who was Brandon Phillips, and he's made staffing changes to make sure this never happens again. We also know that he called the victim and apologized to her as well. Yeah,
I mean, let's be clear. It wasn't just sharp elbows this time.
Yeah.
This was punching way down. This wasn't just attacking the Dooley PAC staffer. This was attacking his wife, who has nothing to do with the politics in Georgia. They don't even live in Georgia, is my understanding.
They live in Virginia or Maryland or somewhere in the DC.
Yeah, in the DMV area, attacking his wife because she accused a prominent man of rape. And she posted a video talking about how it left her, really triggered and upset, that the tweets. And we should be clear, Brandon Phillips' tweet is the one that made the most rounds. There were other people aligned with Collins. There was another influencer who also tweeted something kind of vile along the same lines around the same time. So it fed into this perception, which is really what the problem, beyond the problem of what was said. The bigger problem for Mike Collins is it fed into the big question about his campaign, which is whether he has too many controversies that he can't win in November. And this became just, I told you so. Brandon Phillips is bad news, the ethics investigation, your social media being too provocative, too problematic, too biting, too racist, too sexist. All the critics who've been saying, see, I told you so, and look what he's tweeting when he should be worried about this runoff with Derek Dooley. So that's why it was such a big problem for Mike Collins. I do think he did the best he could to clean it up by quickly firing Brandon Phillips, calling the woman and apologizing personally. He couldn't have handled it any better, but the fact he had to do it at all just speaks to why people a lot of people believe that Derek Dooley would be a better candidate in the general election.
Yeah, Patricia, Tia mentioned this tweet, but it's not a one and done, right? I mean, Brandon Phillips is also at the center of this House ethics probe accusing Mike Collins of using his congressional office to misuse taxpayer dollars, including hiring Brandon Phillips' girlfriend as a sort of no-show staffer. This is, the Collins and Brandon have both called this nothing burger, that they're going to be exonerated in the end. But this is clearly another sign that Brandon Phillips' issues, the swirl of controversies around him, has affected Mike Collins' campaign.
Yeah, and I do want to say what the tweet said. Brandon Phillips called the gentleman who also works for Dooley's PAC, Matt Lauer's sloppy seconds. That is depraved. There is no other word for that. There's something wrong when somebody says that, when you're in a culture that thinks that that is not just okay, but good to say publicly. And the result, as you said, was that Brooke Nevels, who is the woman on the other side of this, who has nothing to do with this campaign, said she was in the fetal position when she read this. And in her Instagram post, she said, if you want to know why women don't come forward and tell people what happened to them when they're attacked and abused by men in power, this is exactly why. It's a culture that punishes the woman, not the man. Now, in this case, Matt Lauer lost his job, but I don't know, not much else. And it just is a situation to me that is so wrong and so awful. She also said that she had calls from other members of Congress before she heard from Collins. And they had already called Collins to say, you got to get rid of this guy. And so it is a situation where I think it not just raises questions about his electability, but also about Mike Collins' judgment to keep Brandon on after taking on so much water for an office that apparently had a lot of problems for a long time, that were raised not by just anonymous people, but by former staffers who saw this and said they wanted to remain anonymous because they were afraid of retribution, which seems well-founded. And so I think it's an insight into not just Collins' office and Collins' mind and Brandon's mind, but this entire world of online anonymous. It's only it's not anonymous because we know that it was Brandon behind the account, but there's no name on this account other than Mike Collins, and it's taking a lot of people down in a way that is not healthy for democracy or leadership or humans. It's just, to me, the whole thing has been horrific, and he might be their nominee. And he'll have to continue to judge the people he surrounds himself with and the choices that they're making.
And Tia, we know is Brandon Phillips behind Mike Collins' account because it's sort of this open secret in Republican politics. Mike Collins didn't use his name in the tweet, but we quickly confirmed it was Brandon Phillips. But you've had the chance to talk to Mike Collins and Brandon Phillips really over the years. And about their relationship. What has Mike Collins told you about why he's kept Brandon Phillips on board for so long?
Yeah, and we should, of course, I haven't talked to Mike Collins since this happened. Congress is in recess this week. Be really interesting when I catch up with him. Or you guys might catch up with him before I do on the campaign trail. But I will say, prior to this, after the ethics investigation stuff and other things that have happened, I asked Mike Collins, and I've asked him more than once. I remember asking Mike Collins relatively early in his tenure, why did he keep Brandon around knowing that Brandon was so controversial? And what Mike Collins told me early in his tenure and what he told me more recently were the same thing, which is Brandon wasn't going anywhere, that Brandon is his guy and he trusts him, he likes him, and so be it. So I think that shows you how bad the most recent controversy with the tweet about the lady who accused Matt Lauer of rape was, that everything else, including ethics investigations that are going to be a major theme of this runoff, that was not enough to compel Mike Collins to part ways with Brandon Phillips. But this was. Now, I think we should say, Greg and Patricia, yes, he fired Brandon Phillips, and maybe Brandon Phillips will no longer be paid directly by the campaign. I don't know if I believe that Brandon Phillips is truly gone. I guess we'll have to see. And again, we'll have to talk to Mike Collins about what parting ways truly means. And again, Brandon, I know you're listening because you can't help it. Holler at me. I want to know what you were thinking and what this means for you now. Because we should also say Brandon Phillips had other clients, and a lot of his clients were successful in the primary. But I wonder how that's affected his other clients who were, if not using him for runoffs, but still were going to keep him around for future races.
Yeah, and I reached out to several of those clients. Greg Dolezal running for lieutenant governor. Rick Jackson said he no longer has any association with his campaign. Clay Fuller, who just won Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat. Better yet, Brandon, definitely holler and definitely get back to Tia and me, but also just come on the show. We'd love to talk to you.
We were talking about that at Mike Collins's campaign party, which of course was before all of this happened. And I told him we want him on the show, and he made it seem like he was interested in it after the election season. So yes, that invitation definitely is open.
One thing I want to say is that so many people have hired Brandon because his reputation is that he's good at his job. He gets people elected. He wins races, and sometimes that comes at a cost. And that's a deal that people make with themselves in politics all the time on both sides of the aisle. And then it crosses a line. Either it is so bad or it just looks so bad. You know, obviously national Republican funders and donors were watching this and saw it. And they're like, hey, this is over the line. But people hire Brandon because his methods work in today's ecosystem until they don't. And that's when sort of like character and judgment come in.
Tia and I did a really deep dive into Brandon Phillips and his history in January after this ethics complaint came out. And we went through also, he wins. He wins a lot of races. These tactics work.
He wins.
And this is how we closed the story with a quote from Brandon Phillips saying, "Politics is a rough sport, and they say nice guys finish last. I like winning." So there you go.
Perfect note to end on.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoy what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It helps others find the show and join the conversation. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.